Welcome to another episode of Marvel Cinematic University show where we talk about everything in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and lots of other universes because there are 52 weeks in a year, and even though Marvel puts out a lot of content, they don't put out that much. And as we've been doing for as long as I can remember, covering everything in the DC universe. And even as the DC universe hits a hard reset, we still got to cover everything in it, even if that thing is something that three people are going to see, unfortunately. But before we get to that, AC is not here because he was unable to see this movie this weekend. And I thought, well, who's someone who's been reliable for us of late, who's coming with great takes, and who tweeted about this movie, so I know for a fact they saw it. Welcome back to the show, Rod Morrow, the black guy who tips. Rod, how are you?
Hey Jake, how you doing, man? Thanks for having me back. And listen, I would love to talk about this movie. It seems like there's not a lot of people out here to talk about this movie with.
I agree. And the movie we're talking about, as you can tell by the title, I never know why podcasts are coy about that. It's in the title of the episode. We're talking about Blue Beetle, the new DC movie, which is in both the DCEU, but also possibly part of the new DCU, which I think is so much of the confusion about the movie. But it is the new film that kind of was just dumped. It's during the strike, so there's not a lot of promotion. And I think that because they're rebooting everything, it's really in a tough spot. But I want to talk about it for a while without getting into any of that.
Right.
I don't want to really get into the universe stuff or why it didn't do well, because I think there's a lot of discussion about that, particularly among people who haven't seen it. Ron, just talking about what you were expecting going into the movie and how you felt coming out of it.
Well, going into the movie, I was okay. Let's start with this. When they announced the movie, I was like, yeah, whatever. Even though I love the show Young Justice, and the Blue Beetle story arc in that was so good. I just was like very down on DC projects because the last few before that hadn't really been good to me, and the ones that I thought would be good, they weren't good even. So, or they were underwhelming. I shouldn't say not good, but at any rate, wasn't that excited. Then I saw the trailer for it, and the trailer was so good. I was like, oh man, maybe it'll be good. I don't know, but now I do want to go see it. So I went in to see it, and I had just kind of middling expectations. Like, I wasn't thinking it was gonna like knock my socks off, but I also wasn't thinking, I was hopeful that it wouldn't be trash. And so um after seeing it, honestly, I was very impressed. It did surprise me. It was much better than I thought it would be. It is, I say this all the time, but it's not judging it on like that Marvel scale, because I understand that, like, a Marvel 6 is like some other company's 8 or at this point or whatever. Like, but I felt like this, even as a DC film, comic book film, whatever, it really acquitted itself. It's a good film. No film is perfect, I know all that, but it's a good film. That I think the main things that people that would really hinder it are going to be things that don't have anything to do with this film, like, and that's not his fault. So I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I look forward to buying it on streaming or whatever.
Yeah, I agree. I had really low expectations for it, mostly because, like, and I think like I try to tell people in my life who are not as into movies, like, when you can tell a movie is not going to be good. For example, like, with a couple exceptions, if a movie comes out in one of the first 2 weeks of January, anyone who knows anything about movies will tell you it's a bad movie because they do that because they want to pretend that that's why it's not making money.
Mm-hmm.
Or if critic ratings don't go up on the internet until like 3 days before the movie comes out, they think it's a bad movie. I think that there are signs you can tell a studio thinks a movie is bad.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, they were doing a lot of those with this movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so I was expecting it to be bad because I'm like, well, Warner Brothers seems to think it's bad, and if they thought The Flash deserved to be treated like the greatest movie of all time, then why would I?
Right.
And then as the reviews started to come out, they're like, oh, it's actually pretty good, especially for a DC movie, because like I think that people really have low low opinion of DC.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went in being like, you know what, I expect this to be a solid whatever, like a good time at the movies. I have Regal Unlimited, as I always talk about, so worst thing that could happen is I spend 50 cents. And I really enjoyed it, and I think that it is a movie that doesn't it's a classic case of a movie not reinventing the wheel in any way, but it has enough interesting ideas about how it's going to make the wheel its own that it makes up for a lot, like, because, and obviously I think that there's some slow bits in the first 20-25 minutes that are just like the rudimentary superhero stuff, but the personal touches of it feel so personal and feel like something that's been missing from both Marvel and DC, where none of the characters, I mean, with the exception of some of the stuff on TV, but like it was reminiscent of what Miss Marvel had with its family structure, whereas a family we don't normally see. And I feel like all of that stuff, and because it was so much about that, that wasn't just like window dressing.
Right.
That is what turned it from being just like a solid base hit to like a solid double, a stand up double for me.
Yeah, I think it has a lot of heart, and you can just tell art that is made from people of the culture that is on the screen. You know, sometimes you can feel like an incongruence where you're like, oh, this person's trying to make a story about such and such, but they're not, like, they don't have any real experience, so you know there's little touches that they're gonna miss or things. And I just thought that this film had that all over the place, where it's just little cultural references and jokes, and the interactions between the characters and the conversations they had. Another thing I liked about it too is that DC, to me, typically avoids cultural issues even more than Marvel. Like, Marvel will put out like a Black Panther or something, and you're like, that's all this film is about, is a very, very strong inner monologue, like discussion in an interracial conflict. DC's more like, guys, we're not really worried about that. We're worried about, you know, aliens fighting in grayscale.
Guys, we have to sell this overseas,
Exactly.
and people overseas don't like people of different races.
Right, exactly. And this is a film that fully dives into the other way on that, and I think I applaud them for that, but also they got it right and did a good job with it. So I think that's another reason that it really blew me away in that area.
Yeah, and I think yeah, and I think that it's not just that like it's important that they do that,
Right.
although it is, but I think that the instructive thing about it to me, which is kind of obvious anytime you see it, is that even if it wasn't important and the right thing to do, it also just makes a movie more interesting. Like when you see a culture that's not normally portrayed and it's portrayed with truth and it's entertaining, that is just going to be like 25% more interesting to watch at least than the same family you've seen over and over again. You know, like, and I think that was really beautiful to me was I saw it in a, you know, being in New York City, most movie screenings I go to are going to be more crowded than the average one. Like,
Right.
so I saw it on Friday afternoon at like 4 o'clock, and it was probably like a half full screening, which I think was probably the most any screening got in anywhere. But there was clearly multiple families of I don't know if they were specifically Mexican, but Latin American families. And there was like 7 or 8 times in the movie where they hysterically laughed at something that I didn't get.
Yeah.
And that to me is like, that's the mark of a movie that is made by someone who's part of a culture and is for that culture.
Right.
And it's, I didn't, you know, and obviously there's some people on the chuds on the internet who would be alienated by that sort of thing, but they can go fuck themselves.
Right.
That like, that's how I knew it was like, obviously, you know, if someone wants to quibble with something not being authentic, and I can't say anything, but it felt authentic given that like clearly there's shit that's not for me. You know, I am, I as a white guy in his 20s, I am constantly catered to in this space. Right. It feels nice not to be catered
and
to.
even as like a Black person with our own intracultural references, and you know, starting to see a lot of that in movies, it felt good to not know. Like, because to me, I went, okay, so that is something just for the people that made the film and the kind of people that are represented in the film, and I'm cool with that. Like, someone will do an Easter egg, something, someone will write a review or something. It's, you know, this is another reason it's important to have like people of different marginalizations across the spectrum see movies and stuff, so that, because I'm sure there's someone who has that experience that can really tell me like, this is what that hero was at the end that was like comic relief, and when you saw him on the TV earlier, and that kind of stuff are not the deft touches that I'm used to seeing in a DC movie. Normally, you know, it's very like Easter eggy of like, oh, if you knew issue 375 of this show, that wasn't like that.
Mhm.
This was like Easter egg. Like if you are from this culture, you will know that. And I think that felt really, really dope to see.
Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about the lead, Cholo
Mhm.
Maraduena, who is someone I wasn't familiar with. I think it's actually Cholo Maraduena.
Mhm.
And he, I think, is super charismatic. And I think really kind of surprised me because I think that it's when it's an actor who like I looked at his credits and he obviously had done plenty of stuff before, but when it's an actor who's like never been the star of a movie being put at the center
Mhm.
of a superhero project, they oftentimes can get overwhelmed. And I felt like he really held his own, which is I think was saying a lot given to that it's not like a situation where and there is a version of this movie made by a not Hispanic
Mhm.
director where he's an unknown, but every one of his family members is is a Hispanic actor all from different parts
Right.
of Latin America
Right.
that like they just like pick and choose every famous
Right.
Hispanic person. But like and I think I was kind of impressed by the fact that like they didn't stack it with
Right.
ultra famous people in every
Where you're
other
just
role.
like,
Like they
John Leguizamo and Rosie Perez are in this. Wait a minute, what's going on here?
yeah.
um,
And it's like what he's supposed to be make like I know for a fact that I'm white and
right.
I know that that's not a Mexican accent. What's
Exactly.
going on here?
Yeah, definitely you could
Yeah.
feel those touches on it as well. And also the other thing about this, it was so smart to me because the whole story with the scarab is essentially a story of an alien thing coming to
Hmm.
this world and essentially trying to help eventually, like becoming a hero, but
Hmm.
it's a very much a fish out of water story as just as a hero concept, not a
Hmm.
to tie that in with immigration here, the concerns that people had about immigration. Like I laugh, but I also identify when they were like, we can't call the cops because the cops are going to come
Yeah.
here and start asking some different type of questions. And we got and it also worked in the story. It keeps the story insular.
Hmm.
And the fact that this story doesn't try to do all the like Easter egg connections to the other properties.
Hmm.
It really could be a standalone story that they do a part two of, and it like I
Hmm.
think you can hear Wayne's name on the news in the background. Like one time, George Lopez's
Hmm.
character calls Batman a fascist, but there's no like, oh, Amanda Waller shows up and this, so I
Yeah.
felt like that was all it was it's just it's a smart movie. It's just a very smart movie with the choices they made so that it could work compared to some of the other movies we've seen in the past with DC where it feels like it's all over the place.
Yeah, and speaking of George Lopez, I was really surprised at how much I enjoyed his performance. Not that I don't enjoy him as a comic
Mhm.
presence, but I think that he was. I expected him to be in like three scenes, do a couple jokes, and keep. But he really is one of the emotional hearts of the movie.
Mhm.
And like I would love to see him do more of this in other movies. Like I
Mhm.
think that he's clearly a more talented actor than I would have given him credit for, and I feel bad about.
Mhm.
I not that I never say anything bad about him, but I'm just like, yeah, he's a sitcom actor,
Right.
But I think he really does a lot of the emotional heavy lifting, especially in the third act.
Yes.
And I thought that he was really funny, but also like a rounded character. He wasn't that like there really is no character in the movie that is
Mhm.
one dimensional except for maybe like the villains, which
Mhm.
is whatever. That's how movies are. But like he was given everyone in the family was allowed to be a full
Yes,
person,
I agree
which once
completely.
again I feel like yeah.
And the other thing about the family, I thought they were gonna kind of do this thing where all the superhero films kind of do, where like tragedy in the family, then you kind of fridge the
Hmm.
family, and then they like
Yeah.
come back at the end. It's like we're a family again, remember? But like this
Hmm.
family was so involved in the third act in being heroes,
Hmm.
getting involved. The grandma, oh my god, like there was just like these
Hmm.
moments where you're just like, oh, like I said, it's a smarter film because I think that separates it from a lot of the other films. And especially and then like culturally, like the grandma being like
Hmm.
part of the revolution, with the ponytails and the
Hmm.
stuff.
Yeah.
And then like I think the same way, like if you watch a lot of like Spanish television, the
Hmm.
vibe can be like really silly and then really serious and really melodramatic.
Hmm.
Like that happens all the time within the and I could feel that here in the acting choices and the writing. It was like sometimes it's like over the top silly, and it makes you wonder like how are they going to
mm,
handle a serious third act,
mm,
because everyone's been comic relief to this point, and then it's like third act, like I'm honestly I was tearing up at some of the scenes and
yeah.
discussions because I they were doing such a great job. So yeah.
Mm. And I think a thing that the movie does really well, which I think is what a thing I find incredibly underrated, is that I think the reason why so much of the silliness works
Mhm.
in while still letting it be serious is because the silliness is silly to the people in the universe of the movie.
Yes.
That a lot of the jokes are funny to the people in the universe,
Mhm.
and so you immediately understand, at least I did, that like, oh, they're able to be silly because they know that this is how you kind of deal with things being serious,
Right.
that like, and at the same time, what you talk about with the family not getting fridged, I really appreciated that because like the way that the family's set up, there is no way that you could convince me that the third act would just be Blue Beetle. That would be, Jaime
Right.
flying off and one forgetting his family and then his family forgetting about him. Like
Right.
that just would not. I
Right.
don't believe that.
Yes.
Both because of what we've seen and just because cultural
Right.
expectations. Like I think that and so I think that it was really true to it. It wasn't. It didn't like they didn't let it's not like DC let the writer and director have their authentic story for the first two acts. And it's like,
Right.
and then of course we need to do the standard white teenager third act, so you can
Right.
get the family
And
at
I
the end.
was
It's like
thinking,
no, like they wouldn't do that.
I was worried about that too, because in the past they seem to have done that with so many of these movies where
Yeah.
first two acts in a lot of DC movies, to me, the first two acts are like either good to like at least acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get in
Mm-hmm.
that third act, and you can just tell, like, I don't know if it's in like Industrial Lights and Magic or whatever, but someone just said, listen, we need a grayscale fight with a big old boss, and it just needs to be like long and a lot of violence and at night, and
Mm-hmm.
this film felt
Yeah.
like not like that. And even in the
Yeah.
other films, like say the first Wonder Woman, which I did enjoy, in the third act, well, Steve Trevor's like a fighter pilot. You know what I mean? Like there's a
Mm-hmm.
reason he's there. His family, it was like they're there because they're his family, because we have established there's a
Exactly.
connection here. Even if they
Mm-hmm.
had no expertise, they would show up and fight
Mm-hmm.
on his behalf. But the fact that they all kind
Mm-hmm.
of had some level of expertise was so beautiful. And
Mm-hmm.
then including the Brazilian like heiress in the family unit at the end, like I think that was one of the things that actually made me tear up, was when they were all
Mm-hmm.
like she was getting to
Yeah.
be family too, and she was so
Mm-hmm.
good because like earlier in the film when she was
Mm-hmm.
sad about her father being missing and
Mm-hmm.
her mom being dead, like those scenes really resonated with me on more than just say like paint by the numbers thing. I maybe like maybe the bar was
Mm-hmm.
that low for me because it's DC, but I don't know, they were hitting it out the park to me.
Yeah, and I think that like it just feels like a movie that was less interfered with, probably because all the people who would have interfered with were overseeing reshoot 75 of The Flash. Um, and so I think that there's just a lot of choices that are that don't seem like what a committee would decide, which is always what you're looking for in these movies. And yeah, I thought that the Bruna Mark I don't want to butcher the name
Yeah.
because I know obviously it's going to be pronounced differently because it's Portuguese, but
Right.
Marquezine
Mhm.
um, is I think she was really great. And I think that both the two leads, I think both have whatever happens with this franchise. I can't imagine that we'll see Blue Beetle 2 straight up just
Right.
because of this movie not making any money. But I think that they both have a lot of cares.
Charisma.
I want to say they were charismatic and they have charisma, and I almost said they have charisma. Um, but yeah, I think that it's just I think it's really wonderful stuff. I think that the weakest link for me in the
Mhm.
movie is probably like all of the stuff with the villain plot
Mhm.
is very paint by numbers to me. And I maybe you disagree with me, and it's fine, but I was surprised that it didn't feel like Susan Sarandon was having as much villainy fun as I
Mm.
expected when I heard that she was going to be in this movie. Like I feel like she kind of was. I don't know. Not that there's a ton on the page, but
Right.
her presence wasn't felt throughout the movie, which is surprising given how great of an actress she
Yeah,
is.
what it was for me with her is I think there was a choice made that because of all the charisma of the like Latino characters, the family and all this, they were gonna make her like a blank page. Anyone could have played that part because she was such a just blatantly evil blank slate. The one motivation they tried to give her, which was the misogyny she experienced and being passed over, was her motivating factor. Someone else had to like say that for her. Like she doesn't give that speech. Bruno's character gives that speech and then she agrees with it, like, yes, that is right. And I'm like, no, she should have got to say that. But and also that doesn't seem like a good enough reason to do what she was doing.
No.
So like, yeah, I do agree that the villain, she was a weak villain. And then I'm a sucker for like Naruto and certain anime where they do this thing where the good guy and the bad guy are just different because one of them like had a slightly different experience and chose to hold on to hope, and the other guy just went down the wrong path. I did like the big boss fight between was start with like a C and ends with an X. Yeah,
Carapax.
Carapax and Blue Beetle. That was actually dope to me because I thought that character was so terrible the whole movie because he doesn't
Yeah.
talk. He doesn't have any
Mhm.
motivation, and then he just does what this white lady says to do the whole movie,
Mhm.
and I don't really see why. But when they do the montage of the flashback to when all the way to him being a kid and a war orphan
Mhm.
and taken by this woman and basically manipulated and brainwashed and stuff, I actually thought like that was more depth for that character than Susan Sarandon's character got the entire movie.
Yeah, and I think that was a strong. They didn't put too fine a point on it.
Right.
Like they didn't, because I think so many other movies would say it. But the point being that like both of our stories are stories of this rich, powerful white woman basically coming exploiting us
Right.
for her own gain. And I think, like I said, the fact that they didn't put too fine a point on it is what made it a good point.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of white producers would want to pat themselves on the
Yes.
back and say like, well, you and I are the same. We
Mhm.
both were exploited by white people and capitalism. It's like, no,
Right.
like you don't need to say that because that's not how people talk.
Mhm.
And I think to your point about her motivation not being enough, I agree, especially because it I think part of what doesn't work for me is that we only see her in the present, and so
Mhm.
we know that the reason she shouldn't be CEO is because she's a crazy person.
Mhm.
And so, like, we just have to take their word for it that she wasn't crazy before.
Mhm.
Like, I actually almost wish that there was a scene where I almost wish she vocalized that she didn't get it because she
Mhm.
was a woman, and then someone was like, "No, you didn't get it because you're insane."
Right.
Now, obviously, like that could undercut a message,
Right.
but I think that actually also like a real. Because the thing ultimately is that most
But that
people
would work
who
though, Jake. That
blame,
would work
yes,
on the
exactly,
screen.
because exactly because in real life, most people who blame a slight for causing them to be evil.
Mhm.
In the actual real world, they were already pretty
Right.
evil. There are actually not many good people who become bad people because of something
Right.
like that's just not how people work.
Mhm.
And so, like, if there was a scene where it's like, no, your father recognized that you wanted to destroy the world with these technologies, and he couldn't let you do that. That I think would be much more powerful than just we have to accept. Not once again, not that it's hard to accept that her father would be a misogynist,
Right.
but like, but we also hear first that they worked together all the
Yeah.
time, and she was like his number two. But then he decided when he died
Mhm.
to. And once again, not that this can't happen,
Right.
but it just is. It's it's doing a thing that I think so many movies these days do with villains, where it's like instead of giving a detailed backstory, let's just take an actual societal issue and use that as the blame for a person being bad.
Right.
And it's like, no, most people who are under the boot of society don't become bad people.
Right.
I actually kind of hate that implication that being the victim of misogyny or racism or
Right.
yada 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 will turn you into a bad person. No, most people aren't.
Right. I think it's like if they would have had a flashback where like he catches her making like these military contracts or something. He's like, you definitely
Yeah,
can't be in charge. And then she attributes
hmm
that to misogyny. Then you have the
exactly.
better makings of a villain because it is a villain. Like, you got to be careful
Yeah,
making a villain like too sympathetic because then it's like people think they're the hero. But yeah, I would have liked to see that. I do think she was kind of like the flattest part, and it felt like, and maybe some of that
yeah,
stuff is on the cutting room floor, but it felt like the
yeah.
note from the whoever was like, just make her as drab and flavorless as possible, so that
Yeah.
when we see her absence of flavor, we know bad person.
Hmm.
Everyone else on the screen is
Yeah.
having a great time cutting up, giving us three-dimensional everything. Like, she was so blatantly evil from the first scene. There's just nowhere to take
Hmm.
that character.
Yeah. And the thing always, whenever there's like a evil character who's like a successful person in the real world,
Mhm.
you always have to sell that you have to be able to sell that she could convince a board of like random Wall Street dudes that she's a sane person. And I just didn't believe that for
Right,
one. Like, she never played. Like, the moment where I kind of realized, like, oh, this performance is not working for
right.
me is when he's in the Cord Company office.
Mhm.
And they're like, there's the video of her with, like, the children talking about all the good things Cord is doing.
Yeah,
And she's still playing that like a supervillain. I'm
right.
like, no.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, no. Like, come on, almost everyone can like sell that for 2 seconds. I just don't
Right.
believe that this character is incapable of seeming evil
Even
with
even when
children.
she, like, first shows up and they're digging to get what do you call it? The scarab. And
Scared.
she, like, she immediately does like the cartoonishly evil, like, work twice as
Mhm.
hard or whatever. They're like, we're almost
Yeah,
there. Well, I think you should be there already. There no more
yeah,
lunches for anyone or whatever. Like, it's just like a school principal evil. Yeah, it was just
yeah,
over the top for that character.
yeah. Whenever there's a big supervillain with a lot of henchmen and women working for them, you have to sell that people would be willing to do it.
Right.
And like, I just don't know why anyone like. You mean to tell me that like I apologize.
Yeah.
One of the worst things is that he is credited as Dr. Sanchez, so I
Oh,
can't
that's
tell you
so
if that's his actual
terrible.
name.
Yeah.
So I don't
But she
remember, but
keeps
he has a
messing his name
private.
up the whole time.
But like, you really mean to tell me that like there's not an electrical engineer position at Boeing that he could work for instead? Like,
Right.
really? Like, this is really the best job he
Like,
could
once
get?
he saw she was torturing people, he didn't go, all right, this was not on the a job application description.
Yeah. Indeed did not say this.
Right.
Indeed said I just need to be able to lift 25 pounds.
Right,
That's it.
exactly. Y'all got me out here killing my own people, by the way.
Mhm.
Yeah, he died such a weirdly, like, noble, not noble death, because it's like so the
Mhm.
last second when he's like, actually, maybe this is bad. I'm
Yeah.
like, you gonna die for it? Just jump on the other side of the
Yeah.
door with Hame.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also like I appreciate you. I genuinely think it's a nice moment for him to stand up for himself
Right.
and to demand to be called by his real
Yeah.
name. But it's like getting called by your real name was the final
Right,
straw.
yeah, exactly.
Like,
Like, bro, you late in the game. I thought
not,
you were gonna say something about your people or your culture or something. You was like, nah, my name ain't Sanchez. I'm like, what are you doing, bro? You can't die for this.
yeah. I thought that we mentioned her earlier. I thought that Nana Reyes, played by Academy Award nominee Adriana Barraza,
Mhm.
was really, really
So
funny
good.
and good. And I thought that I actually, when after I saw it and I mentioned that it was good, friend
Mhm.
of the show Michael Springthorpe texted me basically saying like, "Is the moment when the grandma shoots the gun as cheesy as it looks in the trailer?"
Mhm.
And my answer was no,
Right.
because the grandma's a full character and not just old lady. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Nah, when she let the ponytails down and like the musical cue hit in the background, I was like, I want to know her story. Like it wasn't just a
Hmm.
simple like, oh, that's cute. So she's gonna fight now. It was like she has stories for ages, and I know DC doesn't really do a lot of TV, but if they did like some sort of like Nana spinoff where we got like flashbacks to her in the revolution, I'd watch, because I now feel like that's a full character that we've
Hmm.
experienced, and it wasn't just like, a trailer's a trailer. They're not going to be able to show you all that, but
Yeah,
yeah, and it
yeah,
wasn't just
because
her,
I
the whole family, like all of them
exactly.
were great. The father was great, like
Hmm.
is yeah, they just knocked it out the park writing those characters.
Yeah, and I think that the reason why the running gag with the revolution works so well too is I think that there is a way it was about like if it was just a one-off joke, I think that
Mhm.
that would be like, oh, ha ha. But I think that it kind of is. It's based in such a reality that cuts across all cultures. Where like by the time you meet your grandparents, they're such different people they were when they were in like
Mhm.
the younger years of their lives that you really don't know them. You only know of part of them, and I think that it's like it was funny, and it really felt, and I can judge by the laughs of the same, Hispanic families that were in my theater. That is probably the specificity of a revolution is probably something that a lot of them related to, because they were clapping and laughing at all the things plenty. The bit where she calls them more like imperialist scum or whatever is
Yes.
perfect.
Yeah, like I said, even when
Yeah,
she just pulls the ponytails down, and that's the hairstyle of all the posters from the people of the women of the revolution stuff. Like, it was immediately like she had them ponytails the whole time, and we didn't know, and then she just lets them down like, oh bam, and I got the gat, and you're like, okay, grandma was about that, So that was cool. Another thing I wanted to give the movie credit for, the color palette of the action scenes and stuff.
yes.
Thank you. Whoever's been listening,
Yeah.
whoever's like DC for me, one of the big things I dislike is they do so much just grayscale rock monster fights and dark
Yeah.
villains that, like I need my eyes to pop, and on the fights had my eyes popping all over the place.
Yeah, it's the main reason why, like, beyond the fact that I don't think he's good at directing a lot of scenes, why I can never deal with Snyder revisionism,
Right.
because action, the thing he's supposed to be so good at, he is so colorless in a way that, like, started off as stylized and then eventually just felt like, and also I feel like if you know, like, anything about CGI, you know that CGI, that taking away color and making it dark is a way to hide bad CGI,
Yes.
and so you always are thinking about that
Yes.
when you see a super colorless scene, and it happens to with Marvel too. I don't want to act like Marvel
It's
is
not
super
just them.
colorful. And beyond the color, but except for like the bit at the end where they were fighting in the sky, which I kind of was whatever about. You know what was great about this? Almost all the fight scenes took place on sets.
Yep.
Like, there are obviously probably green screens around
Of
it,
course.
but like the fight scenes were in cities and in tunnels and in buildings. They were in places where people could interact with the environment, where it didn't feel like I don't need to see. You know how frustrating it is to see all these movies, and now I'm seeing like previews for Ahsoka, which is probably going to be fine, but like we're already, after only like 5 years of the volume existing, you can just recognize it now, where it's like, oh, it's strange that everything except for what they're standing on is slightly out of focus.
Right.
I wonder if they're just in front of a big screen.
Right. Yeah.
And if it just feels so nice.
I'm not a huge I can't tell often good CGI from bad CGI. It's like it's just, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's something in my brain. It take like, I can tell horrible, but but if it's just like a little off, I'm like, whatever, right?
No, but the same.
Right. Okay. But with this movie, it wasn't just like it was the colors, but they took time with the details, because like even when he's fighting and his suit activates in the sewers, and that's a lot of like hidden people. It's like a Daredevil hallway fight essentially, but with superpowers. And then the other thing is, as a fan of like Young Justice and some of the cartoons where you get to see the character Blue Beetle, the way that they seamlessly had him switching weapons, and like they really brought you the full power of that armor. So they it was only at the end of the film that I started being like, I want to see this guy with the Justice League. Like, I want to see him with other characters, because his power set is so good that and it's so unique in this DC universe. Shazam's kind of Superman, you know what I mean? Wonder Woman is kind of Superman too. Like, here's something completely different. And the way that they even had like Cyborg in the DCEU, Cyborg didn't even use his powers like this way, so like so interchangeably and so fast. So I thought they really acquitted themselves in an area that sometimes DC can really be lacking in with the action.
Yeah, and the thing is, with CGI, like, I can generally tell it, period, just because honestly I watch a lot of videos about it, but I'm very forgiving for it as long as I feel like it is in service of the story they're telling. And when I'm not forgiving of it is when it feels like it looks that way because it was easier for them, or because they ran out of money or time, or because they didn't plan it right. And it feels like a lot of the CGI here was just based on the fact that this movie had a much smaller budget than other DC movies. Obviously it was still really expensive, but like, and you can just tell that they were judicious in what they use their CGI for, because they're like, oh, I guarantee you on some level they were like, okay, we need to his hands during these fight scenes need to almost entirely be CGI because they need to be changing rapidly in a way, and like it would actually probably just cost more to make two different models of a hand and then morph it. Like, that
Okay.
should probably so it's like, okay, we need to spend money on that. And so therefore, we can't have this fight scene take place in front of a fake fire or whatever. It has to take place in a hallway. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that, like, decisions like that, like, the thing I always say about CGI is the difference between good CGI and bad CGI. A lot of the time, is determined before a computer's even fired up. It's when it's what's shot on the day. Because if you shoot something that is conducive to putting good CGI in it, it will look good. If you shoot something and don't think about what the CGI will look like and then just tell them to fix it later, it'll be bad.
Okay.
And I think that they were very clear, once again, just based on how much money was spent and how good the effects were, knowing how far a dollar can go in CGI. I just guarantee that they had a very clear idea of every shot with CGI in it. I bet was completely storyboarded beforehand.
Yeah.
There were no like, oh, could we make this look like this later? No, it's like, it's got to look like this.
Story wise, you could tell they were very judicious with the use of special effects and stuff. Because there's like a lot of acting in this movie and comedy in this movie that isn't based on like superpowers or any of that stuff. A lot of the discussions, the family scenes and stuff, they're well filmed and everything, but there's not a like, oh, we'll just make it funny. We'll make his arms fly around in the middle of this conversation for no reason. It's like everything kind of had a reason. So yeah, I love that about it.
Yeah, and I think that, like, I think that this is, you know, I hope that this doesn't ding anyone's career. I don't think it will, because I think that's kind of clear. Like, I don't think anyone in Hollywood is thinking the reason this movie is not doing well is because the movie's not good. Like, I think that, like, it's but I would really love to see you know, both stars and the director Angel Manuel Soto you know, go on to do big budget, because clearly I think this guy has a handle on how to do a big budget movie and make it personal. I mean, like, which is, I think, the silver bullet of Hollywood these days, until they beat it out of you.
Right.
But
I mean, well, also,
is there anything else?
I think, like I said, the issues for this movie are going to be things that's not about the movie. So one of the things that hurts this movie too is that DC did some, like, what I consider to be unscrupulous marketing of the last couple DC movies, where they do the premieres and they have these celebrities come out, and then they have these quotes from the celebrities that are so bombastic and over the top. And I don't know that they wouldn't have done that for this movie, as much as I think they didn't have a choice, because actors aren't promoting stuff now. But like the stuff where like they have a premiere and Tom Cruise is like, this is why movies are made, and you're like, and then you go see it to be like, well, if Tom Cruise, who I love his movies, if he loved The Flash, it must be better than I thought it was going to be. And then you watch and you're like, well, this is a lie. Oh, that's right, Tom Cruise is an actor. And I think maybe that's going to hurt this. Like, one, I don't know that people were ready to believe that for a third time in a row. But then I don't know that I think the things that hurt this movie, promotion wise, you know, general like American kind of like xenophobia, racism, that kind of stuff. Obviously, like it's the reason like Coco didn't do as good as Frozen and stuff like that, where you're just like, what? This story's beautiful. It's like some people in America are like, that's a brown story. I don't think my kids should see that. So like, it's gonna suffer from all of those reasons, but I just can't separate that from a lot of the suffering is because people can't trust the DC product as a brand. And this movie is going to be the one that pays the most at the box office.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest part of it. Like, because I think people go back a lot to, because I'm generally push back on when people make an argument about like that a movie won't be successful if it's about a character that's not popular in the comics. Because as I always point out, the percentage of people who read the comics who are going to these movies is much smaller than the people who didn't. And like Guardians of the Galaxy, for example, is the biggest testament to it. Not only is the Guardians of the Galaxy not a popular series of comics beforehand, most of the characters in that movie are not the traditional lineup of the Guardians. But people, if Marvel was a restaurant, people had eaten at that restaurant a couple times. They liked everything they had, and the chef said, "Hey, let me give you this special that you've never heard of before." And it's like, yeah, I'll try that. You can't bring in a new character that no one's really heard of for the most part if people don't trust you to get the staples right. If you can't do a burger right, they're not going to trust you to do escargot. You know, and I also think that like, and I think because of that, Blue Beetle, I think, also just unfortunately sounds like the name of a superhero person would make up of like, oh, what, they're gonna do a fucking Blue Beetle movie? And that, and that's not a problem.
Right.
If DC's coming off of 5 straight hits, it's like, hey, I mean, the Blue Beetle sounds a little silly, but
Exactly.
it's going to be good. And I think so. I think that all combines, and the fact that even like the diehards don't care that much because there's so much in flux about what does and doesn't matter. I think that that's a lot less important than people think,
Right.
because it is with Marvel, it's a pretty small population that actually cares that much about canon,
Right.
and with DC, it's just zero
Zero.
spot in that. But I think that like it's hard to, just because the diehards are not that big of a population, if they're not excited about something, then like it's even harder to get regular people excited
Yeah.
for it, because like regular people will oftentimes follow the cues of the people who care a lot about something.
Also,
And
though,
so
at this
yeah.
point, what is a DC diehard? You know, like one of the things
Yeah,
One
yeah.
of the things that Zack Snyder did that I think forever hurt DC and WB in ways they don't understand until now, maybe. Um, the people that became emblematic of what they would call a fan base are people that kind of hate everything except what Zack Snyder says, and
Yeah.
that so like they lost the definition of a DC diehard a long time ago. I used to know
That's
people
true.
who were like, I like DC as much as I like Marvel, and I'm gonna be there for all the movies. And then it just kind of morphed into I like Zack Snyder and I want to see his cut. And then and the people that I knew that were into it just kind of were like, oh, I don't want to be with you guys. You guys have those talking
Yeah.
points,
Yeah, because I think the thing was that, I make fun of the Zack Snyder movies a lot,
Mhm.
and the people who like them, and I will continue to do that.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the thing that hurt DC, which has hurt many a big company that makes stuff for nerds, I self-identify as one,
Mhm.
is that nerds are very good at manipulating the internet to make it seem like their opinion is more widely held than it is.
Yes.
And the amount of people who, like, because obviously Justice League and Batman vs Superman made a lot less money than their equivalent counterparts at Marvel,
Right.
and so already the fan base of those movies is going to be smaller than usual. The people who like that movie, most people did not like either of those
Right.
movies. That's just fact with the way that they were received. And then the people who did like them, most of them, probably not most of them, but like half of them probably don't even think about who directed them.
Right.
And so the amount of people who are actually diehard Zack Snyder fans is not enough to be the base of any fan.
Right.
Like it's not. And the things that they like are things that are inherently not going to be successful. And the other people who are diehards on the internet like are not going to want to be associated with them.
Exactly.
And so it's like I think that these are all like small, like these problems are not ones that encompass the whole fan
Right.
base in any way. And so I don't think that I think the whole thing that the DC people should just not have acknowledged the existence of this rift to begin with, because
Right.
it's so inside baseball that like it basically, by making the Snyder Cut,
Yep.
which is better than the original Justice League
Right.
because it's a coherent movie, but like by doing that, it kind of was like an endorsement for a few years of like, no, we agree that these movies that most people don't like were the right way to
Yeah.
go. And so then you can't really pivot from that
Exactly.
because you just gave an extra $10 million to finish a movie that came out
Exactly.
2 years before, like 2 years before.
Because like
Yeah.
if I were to ask, I think even 5 years ago, what do you picture in
Mhm.
your head when you think of a DC diehard fan versus now?
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
not that the Snyderverse people have grown in number. It's just that they're the ones that got catered to, and so it's like the company is telling you this is our fan, and you're and other
Yeah.
people like us that I assume you as well. If a
Mhm.
DC movie is good, I want to see it. I'm not walking in the
Sure.
theater with like a Marvel tattoo on or something. Like I'm just
No.
here for entertainment, and I bet you there's a whole lot more people like us who like if they had put out a string of just good DC movies, we'd be like, yeah, I look forward to the next movie. And unfortunately,
Mhm.
James Gunn has to do a lot of cleaning up, like PR wise
Yeah.
and stuff that he shouldn't have to, but he's gonna have to do that because something like this that is so fun. We're doing a movie review
Mhm.
and we're like already saying like, man, I don't know if it's getting a sequel. I hope James Gunn, goes through and makes sure that this is
Mhm.
going to be a part of his universe going forward.
Yeah.
Like that's not good when we like the movie to be, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Exactly. And I think that it is like it's one of those things where um you want to avoid painting with too broad a brush whenever you talk about any fan
Right.
base or anything. But then it's also like if you're on the internet, which is like being on a pond full of ducks, and there's 1,000 ducks around you, at a certain point, it is your responsibility not to quack like a duck if you don't want people to think you're a duck. And so, like, I just actually, and so I think that like there are a lot of Snyder fans who are like, but we're not like the crazy ones or whatever. But it's like, but at the same time, like, do you not understand that like if I loved a thing and almost everyone else who loved the thing seemed like antisocial weirdos who, once again, genuinely
Yeah.
have on multiple occasions threatened to do mass violence at comic conventions
Right.
because of this. So it's just like that is what people, and it's not just that like I see that. Most fans don't see that,
Right.
but tastemakers in the industry see it, film reviewers see it, and so like the people who kind of who kind of control the culture of movies have a really low opinion of the
Right.
Snyderverse. They have a low opinion, and so like all these different things come together. And so when they made the decision to do the Snyder Cut, that was kind of like, thankfully, I think it actually won't end up being it. But I was afraid, like, is this gonna be a sea change where now, if you want anything to happen in movies, you just threaten to like kill an
Right.
executive and they'll do it. But
I was worried about that
like
too.
that was the thing. It's like because it's once again you can say like yeah you know not everyone who wanted a Snyder cut was doing that, like no shit, but also I personally love the opinion that once someone like threatens to kill someone or something, you need to think long and hard before you do that, even if it's
Exactly.
unrelated to that threat, you know what I mean? Like, and obviously this really doesn't have anything to do with Blue Beetle, but I think it also is, I think that the tone that Blue Beetle has is closer in tone to a, even though this movie itself is not going to be
Right.
successful, you can imagine a franchise of movies with the tone of Blue Beetle being successful.
Yes.
Whereas I can't see if they put out a movie tomorrow with the tone of the Snyder Cut, it will make less money than Batman vs Superman or the Justice League,
Exactly.
because those movies are like the tone is actually even less like than it used to be.
Yeah, and also another thing I wanted to say for the movie is that it's because I think it is this first movie of its kind as far as the like ethnicity and the culture is trying to carry. It can feel a little tonally like it's trying to be for everybody, you know?
Yeah.
You know, that pressure of like, we gotta get every reference, every joke, guy. We don't know if we're getting gonna be
Yeah.
back here. So like I did
Mhm.
feel a little bit of that in the film. And like it works for me, but I can see how like it's not really for kids, but not really for adults, you know, in some
Mhm.
areas, you
Yeah.
know. But yeah, I'm with you. I think even the other thing that's weird about this universe, you have like the Batman where they're doing a sequel with Robert Pattinson,
Mhm.
but I don't know that that's part of James Gunn's
It's
universe.
not. It's not.
So
It's fully not. That has been confirmed. It's
right,
not, and it
so
shouldn't
we
be.
have movies coming out that are still under kind of
Mhm.
the DC like the DC idea, the content
Mhm.
that aren't gonna count to James Gunn's thing, but it's still gonna affect the way people, because not everyone follows it that closely. It's still
Yeah.
gonna affect the way people
Most people
consume
don't.
this stuff. They're gonna be looking
Yes.
like, why is there another Batman and stuff? And I think when I
Exactly.
was talking about things that hurt the movie that aren't anything to do with the movie, another thing is with it coming out in 2023, so many of these like tropes we've seen time and time again in other films.
Yeah.
You know, like uh in the best ways, this isn't a negative thing, but in the best ways, it felt sometimes like Shazam felt, the first one with the
Yeah.
family.
Mhm.
And
I
obviously
agree.
Jaime and the you know, the bug costume, it kind of feels like he gives a very young Peter Parker, the new one, you know,
Mhm.
the one who's doing like away from homecoming and stuff like that. So like
Yeah.
I think it's gonna get dinged by some people as like feeling so unoriginal, but it's like
Yeah.
I hear that, but that's not the film's fault. And most importantly, even if you're gonna
Yeah.
have a trope in your film, get it right. And I thought like
Yeah.
Jaime as a character, his integrity, his moral
Yeah.
line, his like heart to do good and
Mhm.
empathy, that
Mm.
I want to see that in every film that is in the James
Yeah.
Gunn universe now.
I mean, it's a thing that I've talked about a lot, which I think has been lacking of late in Marvel as these characters become so big and like the world becomes so complicated that I think you need. The thing that makes superheroes interesting to me is that when they're given extraordinary power, they make the choice to help other people with it. And when it feels like now almost every superhero movie is not about saving other people, it's about a bad thing trying to kill our superhero and they need to defend themselves, which is just less interesting to me. That's not what a hero is. That's just someone who happens to have powers. And while like the main storyline is about him being targeted for this because obviously it's his origin, but like it's so clear that he is trying to help other people and that the important thing for him is to use his power for good. And I think that is like such an obvious thing, but if you really think about it, of late with Marvel,
Mhm.
like there are more projects than not where the character creates their own issue,
Right.
or the you know what I mean, like even with
Because they've
Spider-Man
been
No Way Home,
like Marvel's been doing this for 10, 15 years. So now a lot of these characters are super jaded. And even when you introduce a new
yeah,
character, it's a character that has
mm,
watched the other 15 years of projects, like,
yeah,
and it's affected their story. Like, as much as I love like Wanda and Petro and all that,
mm,
Wanda is a result of a problem created by a
yeah,
hero, so yeah, I definitely
yeah,
agree with you. Like there's something that the lore has gotten so big, it's almost like you can't have a character like this until you hit that reboot the way that DC's doing.
yeah,
But it's
mm,
not just having a character like Jaime. I
mm,
need him to be like a tone setter and to be like this
yeah,
movie, whether they make a sequel or not, I don't care. But the tone is the thing they finally got right now,
mm,
where especially
yeah,
for DC, um,
mm,
other than maybe Batman, all their heroes are supposed to have that heart that goes, save the
yes,
kitten from the tree,
mm,
do the thing that's super impractical. And I think
mm,
James Gunn could do that. He's very whimsical, very smart, very emotionally centered with his work.
mm,
Zack Snyder felt anti that. Like not just I don't want to
yeah,
do it.
yeah.
I'm against the idea that people do this. And
It's my
yeah,
biggest problem with Man of Steel
yeah,
is that like Man of Steel, Superman's in. I think that the Zod, character is obviously an understandable character to you.
yeah,
I just full stop don't think Zod can be Superman's first villain
right.
because what Man of Steel introduces to us is the idea that Superman never really used his powers for good for the most
Right.
part until he was personally
Mhm.
involved, and like that is antithetical to Super
Yeah.
like that. Oh.
It's that thing
And of
it's
course the
that
reason is because Zack Snyder is a jaded 15-year-old who thinks
yes.
that goodness is something to be mocked. But
It's that thing where Superman would have always saved that dog. It's just, that there's
yeah,
that one scene where I remember at the time because I was like a fan of the like idea of like, oh wow, they're gonna try to do something dark with Superman. I've never seen
mhm,
that before. And I remember at the time, being like, wow, that was a bold choice Zack Snyder just made.
mm,
I don't know.
mhm,
I don't know what he's gonna do with these other
mhm,
characters, blah blah. Blah. And then of course later I find out, that's just how he makes all his movies.
yeah,
That wasn't like a thought out like, oh, look at this place we have to take Superman where he can grow and become this. Like by the time we get introduced to like
yeah,
Superman, we're like, oh, that's the difference between Man of Steel and Superman. This guy needed to
yeah,
learn these lessons to become something else, and instead, it's no, he's just a dick. And I think
yeah,
that Jaime saves the dog. You know what I mean? Like that's
exactly.
that was the thing that I think like I said, it could be a bit I could be doing that thing where I had such low expectations, I'm giving him extra credit, but Jaime being the kind of character that saves the dog to me is everything that the DCU needs going forward.
Yeah, exactly, because I think that, like, I'm probably being a little too glib and not giving Zack Snyder enough credit for some things, but like, I think the different you thought, and I think a lot of people thought, the Man of Steel was, oh, this is an interesting origin story, and we'll see him grow. But like I said, like, I really think that Zack Snyder just does not, and this is an understandable
Yeah,
thing to believe, does not believe that powerful people can have goodness in them. Really, that power
right.
inherently takes away goodness. Which, once again, that is in the real world, that's a reasonable thing to
Yeah.
believe. That is also not a thing I want the director of a Superman movie to
Yeah,
believe. Like
exactly.
that's just like it's kind of makes you
Yeah.
poor fit
I
for
mean, it's
that.
why he had
And
to
yeah,
that's why we call it the Snyderverse. He had to we like
yeah,
we don't really like we didn't invent the term like Donnerverse until the Snyderverse. Like cuz we were just like those were
exactly.
Superman movies. We don't go back and look at the original Batman movies and call them anything but just Batman movies. This His choices were so dark and jaded that we were like this is this man's dogma. There's never going to be a hero in this that you like in these
Yeah.
films, and that is asking a lot of people to spend money to
Yeah.
go watch people they
Uh,
dislike, that many times a year.
Also, like the whole like what it like it like the idea of if Superman was real, you would be terrified of him, even if he did mostly good things, because he could kill all of us. Like that is a thing that I agree is
Yeah.
true. However, that is a thing that I think you need to balance out with when you're with the actual Superman. If you know him, it is unambiguous that he's a good
Right.
guy, and it's just the people who are scared. But Zack Snyder can't bring himself to it. He's like, no, 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 I need
Right.
to pretend
He needs
like
to be
anyway. I get
scary for reasons that we can like. Uh, because look, we've done that. They've done that story with Superman a million times, like Justice League
yeah,
and all that stuff, where like the person that takes it too far is always like Lex Luthor, but you kind of understand his point,
yeah,
right? Um, and then there's always like random people that kind of like mistrusting of his power. That makes sense. Even Lois Lane in some versions. But this idea that like, yeah, but also he would give us like a lot of reasons to be scared of him. That's not the character. like what are you doing?
no, like it's just it's frustrating because it's like, especially in Man of Steel, we get so much hit over the head and Kevin Costner dies in a tornado because it needs to be clear that people will fear him.
Yes.
Clark Kent knows that people will fear him, and then come Batman vs Superman. He's like, "All right, I've done putting in any effort to make people not afraid of
Right.
me."
Right.
like,
Yeah. I didn't even like just completely what a weird development. And then of course you don't even juxtapose him with a lot of hopeful people because then you're supposed to at least give us like oh, he can learn from
yeah,
being around these people, but it's like no,
hmm
Batman wants to beat him up. Wonder Woman's just kind of like she's fighting with him. And then systemically as you go through each character, right? Superman obviously whole life told don't fight, right? Don't help people.
hmm
Batman has
hmm
retired and is only coming back to kill Superman. Um,
hmm
Wonder Woman, once you do, especially Wonder Woman sequel, spent like 90 years not helping people. Aquaman
yeah,
just wants to get drunk and go to the ocean. Like the
hmm
the entire like timeline, except for I think maybe like Cyborg and Flash,
hmm
every character that's like the main people in this storyline are like, I have superpowers. I would like to just like stay home and not be bothered. That's not fun for everyone.
yes. And, and the last word I'll say on it is that I think a lot of people's pushback would be if there were people in real life with who had superpowers, they would not use them for good to help people. And I agree with you, which is why it's an interesting story.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I agree that that's what would be realistic. But the reason why the movies are supposed to be the characters are interesting is the idea that they would.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's almost like whenever people are like point out that like it's a crazy coincidence happens in a movie, and it's like, yeah, that's why there's a story of a movie and not just a
Yeah.
Tuesday. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
like
Well, it's also the thing
I
too,
agree. Yes,
like I think now it's just we've had enough of that because maybe you could have made a point that Zack Snyder's verse was interesting, when he started it a few years ago as like a zig from all the other DC properties we had seen.
yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, now though, after The Boys and
Mhm. Exactly.
Invincible and all these different,
Yeah.
like we've had every version of like a superhero property where they're dark and jaded and take a twist and
Yeah.
it's cynical and all
Mhm.
that stuff. I think people just want to believe in, a guy that would have superpowers and still go and save some people that weren't, that weren't his family, like it's not a lot to ask, I don't think.
And I also think that in Blue Beetle, I think is very emblematic of this. That I think people who I would say I have questionable morals, the type of people who ask things like, without religion or laws, what would make you not kill someone? Like those type of people, often think that the only way to make a character interesting is to make them have moral ambiguity or moral ambivalence, right? That like Superman is interesting because he always decides to do the right thing or he always tries to do good. And I think that this is a complete misunderstanding of what makes people interesting because like I think that there are in fact, I would say most people in this world who actually do mostly good things are incredibly interesting people, and they're not interesting because they sometimes like. It feels like sometimes when people have a superhero and they want to make them interesting, it's like they have to make it so okay. Every 4 to 5 days, they wake up and say, "I'm going to save some people,"
Right.
and whatever every 5 days is like, "What if I didn't save people?"
Right.
Like that's not that's not how you make them
Right.
interesting. What you make them interesting is to have them have different motivations of what they do things, and the fact that it's hard, like the thing that I love about Spider-Man, because Spider-Man is one character that never really had this issue, is
Right.
that if you create a character that has a lot of power and just wants to do the right thing all the time, that is already impossible, and that
Yes.
is already enough conflict.
Yes.
You don't need to make them morally. You don't need to make them say, but should I save people?
Right.
That doesn't. You don't need to do
I think
that.
also like for Jaime, one of the other things I loved about this film, when they
Yeah.
start off, that scarab is programmed to be like a military weapon, you know, and maybe they'll get
Yeah.
even more into
Exactly.
like the origins of it, if they ever
Hmm.
get the sequel or spinoffs or whatever. But the scarab's origin supposed to be a military weapon, teaching you like making the person the most efficient, dangerous version,
Hmm.
lethal version of themselves. When
Hmm.
Jaime refuses to kill, it's the one time where he like the suit can't even control him because he's like no,
Yeah.
and that's early before he even they've really combined
Hmm.
symbiosis or whatever. And to make the storyline a complete arc, the suit learned from him and stops him from being a killer at the
Exactly.
end. And I'm telling you, man, this movie was so smart for stuff like that.
Which is it mad? Is that a little corny? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I don't know about you. I don't know if you
Yeah.
see I'm under my hat. I got the word schmaltzy cornball tattooed on my
Yeah,
forehead.
exactly.
Who
Nah,
cares?
man, I'm
These
telling
are corny stories.
the whole like last part of this thing, I can't I haven't felt this way in a DC movie ever. But I
Yeah.
felt like
Yeah.
emotionally rooting for them. Like it wasn't
Yeah.
just a
The last one, Shazam, I think is the best comparison because that was the
yes,
last
that's
one
the
I
last one.
felt.
Yes, that's a good one.
Because I think that Shazam handled that's the emotion of family and
Yes.
this, that,
I
the other
forgot about that. That's my
very.
bad. Yeah. Shazam and then this
No,
one
yeah,
are the ones where I felt
yeah,
because
and
like other ones, even when it's Batman or Superman, I mostly feel like, well, I want them to win because they're supposed to win because they're the good guy. In this one, I was like, I didn't just want him to win. I was like, I don't want him to kill this person. You know, you know
exactly,
what I mean?
because you don't want Jaime Reyes, this guy that we have fallen in love with over this movie, to have the moral scarring of killing someone.
Yes.
We want better for him.
Yes.
And that is I think a mark of a true, like, that he is a good person, and I
Yeah.
think that like he's comes from good stock, he has a
Mhm.
good family,
And it's a
and
good
like you
movie, and
would
it's
just.
a good character because
Yeah. Yeah.
similarly, when I watched Man of Steel, not to keep going back to this, when he kills Zod, I
No,
went, that makes sense. That should tell you
I'm like,
something
why
about
didn't you
that
kill
character.
him 3 minutes beforehand
Right.
too, before all these people got paralyzed because
Right.
buildings were falling on him.
Like I never felt like it was beyond the character. I was just like, yeah, that I mean, maybe you don't want to kill him, but like you would kill him if you had to. That says a lot about
Yeah.
that whole movie.
And also, it doesn't. I think it's important too that when Superman is refusing to kill Zod, Zod is killing lots of innocent people.
Mhm.
And so you almost have to be like, from a moral standpoint, it's actually almost indefensible
Yeah,
to not kill him
exactly.
because it's. Whereas in this situation, the moment where he decides not to kill the guy is a moment of pure anger and revenge,
Yes.
which is not. It's we don't have. It's not like there's actually. It is purely motivated by
Mhm.
spite, and it's not about saving people. In that, like, because obviously they don't ever actually put him in the situation, but like if Jaime was given the choice of killing one person or letting that person kill a million people, like you don't believe that he's not like
Right.
it's not like Superman's rule feels like an arbitrary thing that he tells himself to make himself feel good at night,
Right.
whereas this feels like he actually has morals.
Yeah.
And so
And
yeah,
because
I
there's
think
a
it's just
moment
yeah,
a little earlier in too where he is trying not to fight the guy. You know, like
yeah,
like he doesn't want to kill that dude. Even before he thinks about revenge. And so it's just a like I said, it was a much smarter, emotionally heartfelt movie. It was beautiful. And I just
yeah.
I wasn't expecting it. I don't know that they'll repeat it anytime soon. I hope to be wrong on that,
I hope so.
but it's this one will definitely live on in my like top whatever DC movies for a long time.
Absolutely. And any final thoughts? I kind of just gave your final thoughts,
Yeah.
but that's the question you ask when you wrap up a podcast,
Yeah.
obviously.
I don't have anything extra. I think after that, just thanks for having me,
Wonderful.
and check out my podcast, The Blackout Who Tips. The Blackout Tips is the podcast. Go to our website, theblackouttips.com, and if you're interested in watching us do a live show, September 9th, at 3 p.m. We're gonna be live at the Night Theater in Charlotte, North Carolina, downtown. And there's also virtual tickets for people to watch it online, and you can go to the Blumenthal Center for the Performing Arts, and just search the Blackout Tips and buy tickets. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for having me, Jake.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Me and Anthony. He was very excited to know that you were coming on in his stead.
Absolutely.
And you did your plugs before I even had to ask for plugs. This is how you know he's a pro. He's got the microphone arm and everything. It's professional stuff. You can make sure you follow the show at MC University Pod. Please, if you haven't checked out our Patreon, do so. For just $3, you get all of our bonus episodes, access to our Discord. And at the higher tier, you can get some giveaways. We're having $8 members come on our mailbags, which is a lot of fun. So check that out if you haven't. Worst thing is you spend $3 and you cancel the next month. You just hurt my feelings a little bit when you do that, but better that than not subscribing at all. This is why Anthony usually does this. And please find us on YouTube, youtube.com/MCUniversityPod. Please subscribe. 5 stars on all apps. And yeah, just keep interacting with the show. We're going to be doing a couple more random things as we wait for Loki. I think later this week, AC will be talking with Cam Hawkins about a little wrestling. So that will be interesting to those of you who know about that, unlike me, who whenever on our Discord there's a channel for wrestling, and it's truly every time I see it pop up as a new message, just hit the mark as red. I'm like, I'm happy you have that, guys.
Yeah, I didn't grow up as a wrestling guy either, so.
No, it really, of almost everything in the world, it really is the thing that if you didn't grow up with it, it's like, it's Greek. It's like,
right.
No, I can't.
It's like it doesn't
like,
exist.
I can appreciate it if I watch it, but yeah.
Like every Monday I see people going off about something and I'm like, that must be wrestling, right? And I just move on.
Exactly. Yeah, there's certain like terms that I'll see and I'm like, I'm assuming that like the New Order is a wrestler. Or like,
right.
Man, it's like, man, Jay is really, I can't stand him these days. I'm like, I'm sure that's a wrestler.
That makes sense to someone.
Yeah, exactly. It's always so funny whenever you see like, like whenever there's one recently, I don't remember what it was. I'll think of it once I get off the pod. There was a name of a wrestler that was like the name of another like random character actor, and I'm like, why the hell are they say like this has nothing to do with? I mean, it was like back a couple months ago when you were tweeting about like the Hornets rookie Mark Williams. The first 2 times I'm like, why the hell is he talking about the British actor comedian who played Arthur Weasley in the Harry Potter movies? Obviously, I knew you were, but the first time I'm like, what did Mark Williams do?
Mark Williams is at the Hornets game?
Anyway.
Wow.
Damn. Like, I also, honestly, I didn't know Rod was as deep on character actors as I am. I'm glad to know who he is. And speaking of character actors, by the way, please follow me on Twitter and see the immaculate grids I'm putting up. They're incredibly hard. I'm just doing them because they're fun for me to do.
Yeah, I see if you're
it
real,
and I'm very
movie impressed, but I also
if you're real, the thing about it is, I do think of them off the top of my head, which is just to show how deep my sickness goes. But I'm probably going to go up to at least 20. No one's really interacting with them because I don't have a lot of film sicko followers, which is, it is the way it is. Yeah. It's probably good that I don't, because I think that would enable me. If I had a lot of followers who knew as many random character actors as I did, that would be bad for my social order. But anyway, yeah. Do all the things I told you to do. And more important than that, tune in later this week as AC talks to Cam about wrestling. For Rod Morrow, for AC in absentia, I'm Jay Christie. Thank you for listening.